Welcome aboard. This video outlines the construction progress on the Yellow Creek Railroad during 2021. By the end of 2020, all indoor portions of the layout were under construction. 90% of the railroad right-of-way was operational, and about 20% of the scenery had been roughly sculpted. Here is an overall look at the railroad in January of 2021, as seen from the monitors at the control panels. The first project was to get a bunch of old building kits, off the shelves, assembled, and onto the railroad. I started with this 20-year-old pole kit. Originally sold as a Wells Fargo station, it will be used as a bank, in the town of Hawkville. Next, a sand depot was put together and added to the yard in Hawkville. Then, the Red Horse Saloon was unpacked and assembled. The saloon, as with all the other buildings, has interior LED lighting installed. Next, I cut some plywood into strips, scribed some lines, and used a stain wash to make credible-looking boardwalks. Several new Pico outbuildings were acquired and assembled. These were added where it seemed appropriate. Included was a doghouse for the new mom at the Bath station. My father told many stories about Redgate Farm, where he grew up. This inspired me to requisition Grandpa's farmhouse from Pico, and located on the railroad. The farm also needed a barn. Once the farm buildings were completed, and the footprint established, I could move on to the scenery in that area. A retaining wall, chicken wire, shop towels, hydrocal plaster, paint, lichen, moss, and trees were added to complete the scenery around Redgate Farm. A beaver left some downed trees around the pond behind our house. I cut some of these into scale logs and stumps for use on the railroad. These were kiln-dried in the oven at 200 degrees. 2 LGB log cars received a coat of black paint, a couple kiln-dried logs, and some jeweler's chain to give them a new look. With most of the layout operational, it was time to establish a formal operating scheme. This process began with a schematic diagram of the line. From the schematic diagram, I identified each business around the railroad, and the siding capacity. Next, I determined what cars were needed to service each business. Finally, I set up where the rail cars would come from, or go to, in a 4-session operating cycle. Combining all the business traffic, I produced daily freight train consists. This ensured each session could handle the traffic flow. Session 1 would be Train 1, Session 2 being Train 2, and so on. For the local freight trains, I also indicated how many railcar pickups were needed for each session. Based on those tables, I filled out micro-mark car cards and waybills for each piece of rolling stock. After folding the car cards, I used address labels instead of tape to form the pockets. Each address label is printed with a picture of that specific car, to make identification easier. Boxes, to hold car cards for each siding, were identified, installed, and labeled around the layout. The eastbound and westbound boxes will store cards for the daily freight trains when operations are interrupted mid-session. Now that an operating scheme was established, I needed to finish a few minor construction details to support these operations. This includes new sidings, additional turnouts, more uncouplers, and all of the wiring to support them. The cutoff tunnel was electrically isolated, with a switch at the Hawkville control panel. This is where the Denver and Rio Grande interchange train will originate from, and depart to, during operating sessions. The tunnel is not used for normal operations, but it does allow for continuous running while entertaining visitors. Next, I added a team track in Bath. This turnout and uncoupler were wired to the main Bath control panel. A new siding was installed for Deep Rock Quarry. The turnout and uncoupler controls were wired to the small mainline switching panel near Hopkins Mill. This panel is for spurs not visible from either of the main yard panels. A clean machine arrived over the holidays. So, a new spur for the clean machine and GoPro media car was installed in the main yard at Hawkbill. This equipment is not on any normal operating schedule. But, the spur was added to minimize the need for hand-of-God switching moves. For the clean machine, I purchased some 1100 mW rechargeable batteries on Amazon. My indoor main line is just under 500 feet long with grades up to 2.8%. The clean machine will make about 30 laps around the layout on one charge. Prior to abandonment of the G&D Railroad in Summerfield, Florida, some equipment was transferred to the Yellow Creek Railroad in Elgin. This included two 15-year-old water towers. The main structures were intact, but they were severely weathered, on failing foundations, had broken spouts and were in need of new roofs. Once the towers were repaired and placed on new footings, the first was installed along the Valley Division in Bath. The second was located on the Mountain Division, near Andrews Mine. Tired of looking at a blank wall, and on a whim, I added another mirror at the end of Bath by the Sackett Cattle Company. The spur in this picture is temporary, too short, lacking uncouplers, and not wired to the control panel. Shown here is the new Andrews area. A station was built next to the water tower. Then, the turnout was relocated, and the spur extended. Finally, the turnout and uncouplers were wired to the Bath control panel. Now Andrews will support normal operations. Guided by the photo hanging below the bridge, we need to find a space between two studs for the tunnel. Then we know where to position the bridge footing, and where to run the spur. Here, studs were located, the portal aligned, and the spur installed leading to the future Alderon. For now, this will serve as the logging camp siding. Here, a work train is leaving the Hawkbill yard and heading up the Mountain Division toward Andrews Mine, Alderon logging camp, and a link up with the Denver South Park and Pacific. Another train heads down grade from Hawkbill and across the Goat Canyon Trestle on the way to Bath. The Bath team track siding, and the Sackett Cattle Company siding with a new mirror. An overall look at the Yellow Creek Railroad from one of the control panel monitors. Our former president, Gary Cryle, passed away early this year. In addition to his ties to the Yellow Creek Railroad, Gary owned and operated the G&D Railroad, of DIY fame, in Summerfield, Florida. Over his lifetime Gary also built and operated railroads in Indianapolis, Indiana, Sherman, Texas, Morristown, New Jersey, Westminster, Colorado, and Fayetteville, Georgia. A longtime member of the Train Collectors Association, and Lionel Collectors Club of America, Gary amassed a large collection of post-war Lionel trains, many of which were displayed and operated in his Summerfield train house. A graduate of Ohio State University, Gary worked in the food industry for over 45 years. Starting in high school delivering milk, Gary later worked his way through college, into the management ranks, and eventually became a plant manager in the margarine business. While not working or attending college, Gary found the time to start and raise a family, serve as a Little League coach, and lead Boy Scout troops as scoutmaster for his 3 boys. Growing up during World War II, Gary developed a great love of the United States of America. In his lifetime Gary and his wife visited all 50 states, all presidential libraries, and many of our national parks, national cemeteries, and national monuments. A dedicated father, visionary leader, and great American, Gary will be sorely missed. That's all folks, thanks for stopping by.